The pebble was mocking me. It was gray, vaguely oblong, and according to my digital calipers, measured 0.81 inches at its widest point. That was 0.06 inches over the legal limit. A criminal mastermind, this pebble. A sedimentary scofflaw of the highest order. I was on my hands and knees in my own driveway on a Tuesday morning that God had clearly intended for better things, holding a precision measuring instrument to a piece of gravel. Beside me, a can of compressed air hissed impotently. This was my life now. This was retirement. The source of my geological survey was a crisp, cream-colored envelope that had been smugly tucked under my windshield wiper. Inside, on thick, self-important letterhead bearing the Pleasant Valley Estates Homeowners Association crest, was a violation notice. Violation Bylaw 7, subsection C, paragraph 2. Offense: excessive driveway sediment. Fine, $100. Excessive driveway sediment. It had the ring of a crime invented by someone with entirely too much time on their hands and a soul made of beige paint chips. And I knew exactly who that someone was. My name is Frank. I'm 48 years old, and a few years ago I sold the software company I'd bled for 2 decades to build. The exit wasn't buy a private island money, but it was never have to sit in a meeting again money, which is arguably better. My wife, bless her, told me to find a hobby. Something to keep my mind occupied. Something that didn't involve optimizing database queries in my sleep. So I bought land. 15 acres on the far edge of this very subdivision, a parcel nobody else wanted. Why? Because a dormant, single-track freight spur, a dead artery of the Union Pacific network, sliced right through the back end of it. To the average homebuyer, it was an eyesore, a liability. To me, it was the entire point. My retirement dream wasn't golf courses or fishing trips. It was owning and operating my own private heritage railway. A life-sized train set. My solitude, however, was not to be. Pleasant Valley Estates had an HOA, and that HOA had a president. Her name was Brenda. As if summoned by my uncharitable thoughts, a pearl-white Lexus RX 350 whispered to a stop at the end of my driveway. The window hummed down, revealing a helmet of blonde, heavily sprayed hair and a face pinched with perpetual disapproval. "Having some trouble, Frank?" Brenda called out, her voice dripping with faux concern. I stood up, brushing the dust from my knees. I held up the digital calipers. "Just performing a compliance audit, Brenda. This little fella here is a repeat offender, thinking of making a citizen's arrest." Her smile was a thin, bloodless line. "The fine doubles if it's not paid in 48 hours, and I'll need to see a clean sweep before I can sign off on the violation." "Right," I said, leaning against my mailbox. "And do you have a certified sediment measuring gauge for the post-sweep inspection, or are you just eyeballing it? I'd hate for a non-compliant dust bunny to slip through the cracks. The integrity of the neighborhood is at stake, after all." The muscles in her jaw tightened. Brenda and I had a history. A long, petty, glorious history. There was the great mailbox incident of 22, where the forest green I'd chosen was deemed insufficiently harmonious with the neighborhood's natural palette. Then came the War of the Roses, in which my prize-winning Mr. Lincoln hybrids were cited for being garishly vibrant. Each skirmish was a little chess move in our cul-de-sac Cold War. She ignored my question, her gaze drifting past my shoulder toward the back of my property. Her eyes, small and sharp, narrowed. "What?" she said, her voice low and suspicious. "Is that?" I followed her gaze. About 200 yards back, sitting on a newly poured concrete slab the size of a tennis court, was a massive tarp-covered object. It was shaped like a giant loaf of bread, and had the general presence of a slumbering whale. "That's a project," I said vaguely. "It's huge, Frank. It had better not be a mobile home. You know the bylaws. Article 9, Section F. No temporary or mobile living structures." I couldn't help but smile. It was a genuine, soul-deep smile of unadulterated joy. "Oh, it's a home, Brenda," I said, turning back to her. "But trust me, it's far from mobile." The next morning, the cavalry arrived. A procession of heavy-duty Ford F-350S rumbled up my long driveway, followed by a flatbed carrying a small but determined-looking excavator. This was Gus's crew. Gus was a man carved from granite and second-hand smoke. He was built like a vending machine, with a thick neck, a graying beard, and hands that looked like they could crush coconuts. He ran the best heavy-duty contracting outfit in 3 counties, and he possessed a bone-dry sense of humor that I immediately appreciated. "All right, Frank," he grunted, slamming his truck door. "Where's the mystery prize?" I led him and his crew of 3 younger, equally rugged-looking guys to the slab. They circled the tarped behemoth, their expressions a mixture of professional curiosity and childlike wonder. "Said you needed about a half-mile of track laid," Gus said, chewing on an unlit cigar. "Connecting that old spur to this slab here? What in God's name did you buy?" "A hobby," I said, grabbing a corner of the heavy canvas tarp. "Give me a hand." With a collective heave, we pulled. The tarp slid off with a series of heavy sighs, revealing the machine in all its glory. It was a 1955 Electromotive Division GP-9 diesel-electric locomotive, 120 tons of American iron, steel, and raw power. I'd spent 2 years and a significant chunk of my retirement fund having it professionally restored. It was beautiful, painted in the classic black and orange Black Widow livery of the Southern Pacific. Sunlight glinted off the fresh paint and the polished steel of the handrails. Gus's crew was silent. Their jaws were slack. Gus himself just stared, his cigar falling from his lips. "Holy hell, Frank," he finally breathed. "My kid's got a model of this. You got the real thing." "Well," I said, patting the locomotive's massive front coupler, "the wife said I needed a hobby that got me out of the house." Gus chuckled, a low rumble like rocks in a tumbler. "She didn't say you had to be able to drive the house?" He circled it slowly, running a hand over the giant wheels. "A Jeep 9, 16-cylinder 567C prime mover, 1,750 horsepower. Frank, you are a sick, beautiful man." "I've nicknamed it the Evacuator," I said. "Or Evac engine for short, because it's my escape from suburban boredom." "It's gonna be your escape from your bank account, too," one of his guys muttered in awe. The camaraderie was instant. These were my people. They understood the elegant, brutal beauty of a massive machine built for a single, powerful purpose. The work began that afternoon. The rhythmic clang of spikes being driven, the roar of the excavator, the shouts of the crew. It was music to my ears. To Brenda's, apparently, it was the sound of the apocalypse. She was on us within the hour. The white Lexus crunched up the gravel of my access road, and she emerged holding a clipboard and her phone, on which a decibel meter app was prominently displayed. "Excuse me," she called over the noise of a generator. Gus, ever the professional, killed the engine and walked over, wiping his hands on a rag. "Ma'am, can I help you?" "I am the president of the Homeowners Association," she announced, as if he should have recognized her from Mount Olympus. "Your work is creating an unacceptable level of noise pollution. It is 10:15 in the morning on a Wednesday." Gus glanced at his watch. "Yep, permitted work hours are 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. Monday through Saturday, according to County Ordinance 113.8. We're well within our rights." Her eyes narrowed. She was not used to being contradicted with facts. "And what about this?" She pointed a perfectly manicured finger at his truck. "I see a distinct sheen on the gravel beneath your vehicle. You are aware of the environmental bylaws regarding fluid leaks, aren't you?" Gus walked over to his truck, knelt down, and ran his finger through the spot. He held it up. "That's water from the AC condenser, ma'am. It's 100 degrees out here." Brenda was turning a fascinating shade of fuchsia. She was losing, and she knew it. She fell back on her favorite buzzword. "This entire project it's a blight! It is completely out of step with the aesthetic integrity of Pleasant Valley." Gus just looked at her, his face a mask of polite indifference. He was a veteran of 1,000 HOA wars. "Ma'am, we're just here to do the job we were contracted for, on private property, with all the necessary permits. If you have a further complaint, you can file it with the county clerk's office." He turned and walked back to the generator, firing it up with a decisive pull. The roar drowned out whatever she was sputtering next. Gus caught my eye and gave me a slow, deliberate wink. Oh yes. The battle lines were most definitely drawn. The following weeks descended into a masterclass of petty warfare, all orchestrated by Brenda. It was almost impressive in a deranged sort of way. She started by calling the county about my permits. A weary-sounding inspector named Dave showed up, took one look at my binder of paperwork, another look at the half-finished railway, and gave me a thumbs up. "Looks good, Mr. Henderson. Kinda cool, actually. Just try to keep the noise down, eh? The HOA lady calls us 3 times a day." Next came the portable toilet. Gus had, of course, rented one for his crew. Brenda took to photographing it from her back porch with a telephoto lens, presumably to document this permanent, unapproved structure. She sent a cease and desist letter, claiming it violated the neighborhood's visual harmony. I had my lawyer reply with a letter that included a copy of the rental agreement, highlighting the 7-day term, and a polite suggestion that she find a more fulfilling hobby. Her finest moment, however, was when she started leaving laminated printouts of obscure HOA bylaws taped to Gus's bulldozer every morning. They were always related to things like unauthorized soil displacement or commercial equipment storage. Gus just collected them. By the end of the second week, he had a stack thick enough to stop a small-caliber bullet. The focal point of her obsession, the ground zero for her rage, quickly became the crossing. My private access road, the one leading from my driveway to the back of my property and the work site, had to be bisected by the new railway line. It was all my land, but the crossing point was perfectly visible from the second-story window of her house. She saw it as an invasion. I saw it as the main attraction. One morning, Gus and I were standing over the blueprints, drinking coffee from thermos cups as the sun came up. "You know she's gonna absolutely lose her mind when we put the crossing signals in," Gus said, tracing a line on the paper with a thick finger. I took a long, satisfying sip of coffee. "That's why I ordered the model with the extra loud bells and the high-intensity LEDs. Top of the line." Gus looked at me, a slow grin spreading across his face. "Frank, you're a menace." "I'm a hobbyist, Gus," I corrected him gently. "A dedicated, safety-conscious hobbyist. It's a very important distinction for my lawyer to be able to make." He just shook his head and laughed. Finally, the day came. The last spike was driven. The last wire was connected. My half-mile of private railroad was complete. The crossing was a thing of beauty, with classic red and white striped gates, flashing lights, and bells that, when tested, rang out with a joyous, authoritative clang that I knew could be heard all the way to Brenda's beige-tiled kitchen. It was time for my checkmate move. I didn't just call her. I didn't just send an email. I went to my lawyer, a sharp young guy named Miller who found my entire project hilarious and had him draft a formal, legally airtight letter. It was addressed to the Pleasant Valley Estates HOA Board of Directors, care of its president, Brenda. It was a masterpiece of passive-aggressive legalese. It formally notified them that on the upcoming Saturday at precisely 2 p.m., I would be conducting the first of several necessary low-speed locomotive engine systems tests on the private railway spur located entirely within the bounds of my property at 112 Oak Ridge Lane. The key paragraph, the one Miller and I had labored over like two poets crafting a sonnet, read, "For the safety of all parties, the automated crossing signals and gates located on the private access road will be active during said test. It is imperative that this crossing remain clear of any and all obstructions, including vehicles and personnel, for the duration of the test, estimated to be approximately 30 minutes. We sent it via certified mail. Return receipt requested." The little green card came back 2 days later, bearing Brenda's spiky, indignant signature. She'd received it. She'd been warned. The paper trail was complete. The trap was set. All I had to do now was wait for the mouse to take the cheese. Saturday arrived, bright and clear and smelling of cut grass and impending victory. At 1 p.m., I was in the cab of the Evac engine, my sanctuary of steel and diesel. The air was thick with that intoxicating industrial perfume, a blend of oil, old metal, and the faint, lingering scent of the fresh paint. For a software guy who'd spent 20 years in the sterile, climate-controlled world of server rooms, this was heaven. I ran through my startup checklist, my fingers gliding over the cool, heavy controls. Battery switch, on. Isolation switch, on. Fuel pump, on. The engine room behind me whirred to life. I thumbed the starter button. Deep in the guts of the locomotive, the 16-cylinder prime mover coughed, then caught, settling into a low, throbbing idle that vibrated up through the floor, through the soles of my feet, and into my very soul. It was the sound of 1,750 horses waking from a long nap. I felt like a kid on Christmas morning, if Santa had brought him a 120-ton freight train. My phone buzzed in my pocket, pulling me from my reverie. A text from Brenda. Of course. Brenda. I got your ridiculous letter. I'm warning you, Frank. If that thing makes a racket, I'm calling the police for a noise violation. Brenda. And don't think I don't know you don't have the proper insurance for a commercial vehicle like that. You'll be hearing from my lawyer. I smiled and typed back, my thumbs feeling oddly delicate after gripping the locomotive's throttle. Me. It's not commercial, it's a hobby, and it's insured for more than your house. Just stay clear of the crossing at 2 p.m., please, for safety. The 3 dots appeared, then vanished. No reply. That was more ominous than any threat she could have written. I picked up the walkie-talkie I'd given Gus. He'd agreed to act as my spotter for the first run, mostly for the entertainment value. "Gus, you copy?" I said into the handset. His voice crackled back, tinny and distant. "Loud and clear, Frank. How's it feel to be captain of your own landship?" "Like I should have done this years ago. You see any movement over at the Kremlin?" There was a pause. I could picture Gus standing near the property line, shading his eyes with his hand. "Negative on the movement, but the white Lexus is polished up and pointed this way. I got a bad feeling in my gut, buddy. The kind I get before a tornado or when my wife says, 'We need to talk.'" "Copy that," I said, my good humor hardening into resolve. "That's not a bad feeling, Gus. That's the feeling of inevitability." I clicked off the walkie-talkie and looked at the clock on the control stand. 1:45 p.m. 15 minutes to showtime. I took a deep breath, the diesel fumes filling my lungs, and grabbed the throttle. It was time to get this show on the road. Or rather, on the rails. At exactly 1:57 p.m., I eased the throttle forward into the first notch. With a low groan of protest from the brakes and a sigh of compressed air, the Evac engine began to move. The 120 tons of steel lurched, then rolled, the massive wheels beginning their rhythmic, hypnotic clack-clack, clack-clack on the newly laid rails. I kept the speed to a crawl, no more than 5 miles per hour. This wasn't about speed, it was about ceremony. It was a victory lap I was taking before the race had even officially ended. I savored every foot of track, the slight sway of the cab, the panoramic view of my own backyard kingdom from 6 feet up. The track made a gentle, sweeping curve around a copse of old oak trees, and then the crossing came into view. And so did the obstacle. It was so perfectly, predictably, infuriatingly Brenda. There it was, her pearl-white Lexus, parked with malicious precision directly in the center of the tracks. Both driver-side tires were perfectly aligned with the rails, as if she'd used a laser level. It sat there, gleaming in the afternoon sun like a monument to spite. She wasn't even in it. She was standing on her back porch, a solid 150 yards away, arms crossed, her phone held to her ear. I could practically feel the smugness radiating off her from across the field. She had me, or so she thought. She believed my only options were to stop, or to be the crazy guy who called the cops on his neighbor. A battle she knew she could win on the "he's a maniac" front. She had failed to consider option C. I brought the Evac engine to a smooth halt about 100 feet from the crossing. The rumble of the idle was the only sound. I reached up and pulled the cord for the air horn. The sound that erupted was biblical. It wasn't a car horn. It was a deep, resonant, two-tone blast that rattled the windows in my own house and sent a flock of birds scattering from the oaks. It was the sound of pure, unadulterated authority. On her porch, Brenda didn't even flinch. She just smirked and held the phone tighter to her ear, probably telling the 911 dispatcher that I was trying to intimidate her. Fine. Plan B. I pulled out my own phone, my heart beating a steady, calm rhythm. My hand didn't even shake. I found her number in my contacts under the Dragon Lady and pressed call. It rang twice before she picked up, her voice a shrill torrent of rehearsed outrage. "I'm on the phone with the police, Frank. They're recording this. You are harassing me with this monstrosity. I'm on private property and you are threatening me." I kept my voice low and level, a perfect imitation of a reasonable man. "Brenda, you have 60 seconds to get in your car and move it off my railroad crossing." "This isn't a railroad crossing. It's a driveway, my driveway," she shrieked, a lie so bold it was almost admirable. "Brenda, look at the property stakes Gus helpfully repainted last week. This is my private property. Your car is trespassing on my private property, which also happens to be a private railroad crossing, of which you and the entire HOA board were given a legal 10-day written notice. You are creating an unsafe condition. You have 30 seconds to move your vehicle before I do it for you." Her laugh was a brittle, ugly thing. "You wouldn't dare! You'd go to jail for life! I'll sue you for everything you have! I'll own this house! I'll own that stupid train!" 15 seconds, Brenda," I said, my voice as cold and hard as the steel wheels of the engine. "This is your final warning." "Go to hell, Frank!" she screamed, and hung up. I lowered the phone. I looked at her gleaming white SUV, a symbol of everything I detested about this neighborhood. I looked at the 120 tons of American steel I currently had at my command. I glanced over toward the property line and saw Gus, standing at a very safe distance, just shaking his head with a wide, disbelieving grin on his face. He gave me a short, sharp nod. I had done everything by the book. I had warned. I had documented, I had pleaded. This was no longer an act of anger. This was an act of physics, a simple problem of an immovable object meeting an unstoppable force. And I was driving the unstoppable force. With a final, deep sigh, I placed my hand back on the throttle and nudged it forward. The engine gave a mighty roar, and the Evac engine began to roll forward once more. The final 50 feet were a symphony in slow motion. Time itself seemed to stretch and warp, the world narrowing to the space between the front of my locomotive and the side of her car. The low groan of the prime mover was the bass line. The steady clack, clack of the wheels was the percussion. The high-pitched whine of the electric motors was the string section building to a crescendo. 30 feet. I could see the reflection of my own massive engine growing in the Lexus's tinted windows. It looked like a shark approaching a seal. 20 feet. Her car's proximity sensors must have detected me because the alarm began to shriek, a frantic, useless plea against the inevitable. 10 feet. The massive, solid steel front coupler of the GP9, designed to link together million-pound freight consists, loomed over the driver's side door. Contact. It wasn't the explosive crash you see in movies. It was far more intimate, far more satisfying. It started with a single, sharp pang as the coupler punched through the thin outer skin of the door. That was followed immediately by the sickeningly musical sound of the safety glass in the window shattering into a million tiny diamonds. Then came the crunch, a deep, resonant, prolonged grinding and tearing sound. It was the sound of a high-end luxury SUV's frame, its crumple zones, its entire structural integrity, giving up the ghost against a force it was never, ever designed to encounter. The sound of metal twisting, of plastic snapping, of a six-figure vehicle being reduced to its base components. The Evac engine didn't slow. It didn't even notice the resistance. The Lexus, screaming its electronic death cry, was simply pushed. It slid sideways, its tires digging uselessly into the gravel and ties. I stayed on the throttle, pushing it a good 50 feet clear of the crossing. The grand finale came when the rear quarter of the mangled SUV met the steel pole of the crossing signal I had so diligently installed. With a final, soul-satisfying shriek of tortured metal, the Lexus folded itself around the post like a cheap piece of aluminum foil. The back half tried to go one way, the front half the other, and the whole thing just collapsed in on itself. I brought the engine to a smooth, gentle halt. And then silence. A profound, beautiful silence, broken only by the gentle, throbbing hum of the diesel engine and the faint, dying beep, beep, beep of the Lexus's fatally wounded alarm system. That, and the sound of Brenda standing on her porch screaming a string of obscenities so raw and so blue it could have peeled the paint off my house from 200 yards away. I sat back in my chair, took a deep breath, and allowed myself a small, satisfied smile. The crossing was clear. It took them 7 minutes to arrive, which was impressive. 2 county sheriff's department cruisers, lights flashing but sirens off, rolled cautiously up the road. Brenda, seeing her saviors, launched herself off her porch and ran toward the first car, a whirlwind of flailing arms and shrieking indignation. "He tried to kill me! He ran over my car! Arrest him! Arrest that maniac!" she screamed, pointing a trembling finger at my locomotive, which sat idling patiently, looking as innocent as a 120-ton piece of machinery possibly could. I calmly went through my shutdown procedure, killed the engine, and climbed down the steel ladder from the cab. I was holding a thick 3-ring binder. The first officer, a tall guy with a mustache and a weary expression that suggested he'd seen it all, met me halfway. His partner stayed with Brenda, trying to get a coherent sentence out of her. "Afternoon, sir," the officer said, his hand resting casually on his belt. "I'm Deputy Miller. Can you tell me what happened here?" He gestured vaguely at the mangled pretzel of a Lexus wrapped around the crossing signal. "Yes, officer, I'd be happy to," I said, my voice the very picture of calm cooperation. I opened the binder to the first tab. "Here," I said, handing him a plastic-sleeved document, "is the deed to my property, clearly showing my ownership of this entire parcel of land, including this access road and the ground it's on." I flipped to the next tab. "Here are the county-approved permits for the railway installation, signed by your colleague, Inspector Dave. Feel free to call him." Another flip. "Here is a copy of the certified letter, sent 10 days ago via registered mail to the HOA and its president, Miss Brewster over there, officially notifying them of this test. And here," I added, handing him the little green return receipt card, "is her signature, confirming she received it." Finally, I pulled my phone from my pocket. "And here," I said, tapping the screen, "is the footage from the forward-facing, high-definition camera mounted on the locomotive. It's been recording for the last 30 minutes. The relevant part starts at the 25-minute mark. You'll hear me give a full 60-second warning via a phone call, which I also have the records for." I held the phone out to him. He took it and watched. I could see the little screen reflecting in his sunglasses. He saw the car. He heard the horn. He heard my calm, clear request. And he heard Brenda's shrieking, threatening refusal. He watched the slow, inexorable approach. He watched the impact. He watched for a full minute, then handed the phone back to me, his expression shifting from professional suspicion to a sort of weary, beaten-down resignation. He sighed, a long, heartfelt sound. He walked over to Brenda, who had finally stopped screaming and was now hyperventilating. He spoke to her in a low voice for a few minutes. I couldn't hear what he was saying, but I could see her face fall. The righteous indignation drained away, replaced by the pale, slack-jawed look of someone who has just realized they've made a catastrophic and very public miscalculation. Deputy Miller walked back over to me, shaking his head slowly. "Well, sir," he said, rubbing the back of his neck, "it's on your property. You gave ample written notice. She was trespassing. You made a documented effort to have her move. As far as we're concerned, this is a civil matter. We won't be filing any charges." He paused, looking from me to the train, then back again. "But for the love of God, please tell me you're not planning on doing this every weekend." I gave him my most reassuring smile. "Only if she parks there, officer." The story of the Evac engine versus the Lexus spread through Pleasant Valley Estates faster than a wildfire. It wasn't just gossip. It became instant legend. The sheer audacity of it was something the neighborhood hadn't seen before. I started noticing little changes. People who had previously only given me curt nods would now offer big, conspiratorial grins. Old Mr. Hendershot from down the street, a man I was sure didn't even know my name, gave me a crisp thumbs up as I checked my mail. I was no longer the weirdo at the end of the cul-de-sac. I was a folk hero. I was the man who had finally stood up to Brenda. Her reign of terror, built on a foundation of petty fines and beige-colored rules, was broken. The inevitable emergency HOA meeting was called for the following Thursday. The community room, normally a sad, empty space that smelled of stale coffee, was packed. It was standing room only. The air buzzed with anticipation. It felt less like a homeowners meeting and more like a public execution. Brenda stood at the front, looking pale but defiant. She tried to seize the narrative, her voice cracking with emotion as she painted a picture of a peaceful Saturday shattered by a deranged, power-mad neighbor and his unregulated industrial death machine. She talked about her trauma, the fear for her life, the flagrant disregard for community safety. It was a masterful performance, right up until the point where she started crying. They were, I noted with a diagnostician's eye, completely fake tears. When she finished, the room was silent. Then, the new interim moderator, a reasonable accountant named Bill, said, "Thank you, Brenda. Mr. Henderson, do you have a rebuttal?" "I do," I said, walking to the front. I didn't have a speech, I had a projector. I connected my laptop, and the wall behind me lit up. "Ladies and gentlemen," I began, "I won't bore you with my side of the story. Instead, I'll just show you the facts." I played the video. The whole room saw what Deputy Miller had seen. They saw the Lexus parked squarely on the tracks. They heard the deafening horn. Then, I unmuted the audio from my phone call recording and played it over the community room's speakers. They heard my calm voice. "Brenda, you have 60 seconds to move your car." And they heard her shriek, "You wouldn't dare! I'll sue you for everything you have! I'll own that stupid train!" A collective gasp went through the room. It was damning. It was irrefutable. It was the truth, broadcast in high definition for all to see. I paused the video right before the impact. "As you can see," I said calmly, "every reasonable step was taken to avoid a confrontation. Unfortunately, Miss Brewster chose not to cooperate. The subsequent vehicle relocation was a last resort to ensure the safety of the railway test, for which legal notice had been served." Brenda was staring at the screen, her mouth opening and closing like a fish. She had been so sure of her own victimhood that she never considered the existence of actual evidence. A woman in the front row stood up. "I'd like to make a motion," she said, her voice ringing with newfound confidence. "I move for a vote of no confidence in Brenda Brewster as president of this association." "Seconded," shouted about 20 people at once. Bill, the accountant, looked at Brenda, then at the furious faces in the crowd. "All in favor?" A forest of hands shot up. It looked like every single person in the room. "All opposed?" One hand went up. A single, trembling, lonely hand. Brenda's. "The motion passes," Bill announced into the stunned silence. 48-1. It was over. She wasn't just defeated. She was publicly, utterly, and gloriously humiliated. She grabbed her purse and fled the room without another word. A "for sale" sign appeared in Brenda's front yard a week later. A quiet couple from Ohio bought it, people whose primary hobby seemed to be bird watching. They were delighted by the train. The new HOA president was Bill the accountant. His first official act was to formally apologize to me on behalf of the association and to declare the driveway sediment bylaw null and void due to excessive absurdity. One Saturday, a few weeks later, Gus and his crew showed up unannounced. They had a truck loaded with lumber and concrete. "What's all this?" I asked. "Housewarming gift," Gus grunted, pulling out a set of blueprints. "Every train needs a station." And on their own time, on their own dime, they built me a beautiful, charming little station platform next to the concrete slab, complete with a bench and a small, tasteful, Pleasant Valley Station sign. It was an act of kindness and solidarity that meant more to me than the locomotive itself. The story ends here, on a perfect autumn afternoon, a month after the great Lexus incident. I'm hosting a small barbecue on the new station platform. Gus and his family are here, along with Bill the accountant, old Mr. Hendershot, and a few other friendly neighbors who've come to see the infamous Evac engine up close. The air smells of grilled hot dogs and diesel. I'm giving the kids short 5-mile-per-hour rides in the cab, their faces alight with pure, unadulterated joy. Gus is manning the grill, telling a highly exaggerated version of the story to a rapt audience. Everyone is laughing. I stand off to the side, leaning against the railing of my very own station, and take a long sip of a cold beer. I look out over my property, at my perfectly legal, fully operational private railroad, at the happy faces of my new friends. I reflect that sometimes the only way to deal with an immovable object is with an unstoppable force. It just so happened that my hobby was the most unstoppable force in the neighborhood. I look down at my own driveway, visible in the distance. It's clean, pristine, and completely free of any judgment. And the best part? I haven't seen a single pebble on it since.